Thank you for joining me in the Zoom box to hear about my new role in the Emergence of Equity, Race, and Cultural Diversity Initiative positions in district level leadership. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank Arlen Peoples and the good folks at the Educators Network for providing me a platform to provide my perspective about this very important work. My goals today are pretty simple. I want to help participants do a couple things. Understand the value and the importance of racial equity leadership in today's systems. Learn how directors of equity can support systemic transformation. And questions to consider when advocating for the position. Before I begin, I thought I would begin by sharing with you a little bit about me, what I've been doing in my new role, and some of the goals for me in the 2021 school year. First and foremost, this is the beginning of my 25th year in education. During my career, I have been afforded the opportunity to serve students in roles as a substitute teacher, a dean's assistant, a high school teacher, a coach, dean of students, an assistant principal, a principal, and now a district administrator. I was also an adjunct faculty member at Elgin Community College, where I taught English as a second language for over 12 years. I've also served in the Illinois Army National Guard for 6 years to pay for college, and I'm a very proud veteran. I can attest that I've always known that race has played a significant factor in my personal and professional endeavors, but understanding how those lived experiences have impacted me is something that I continue to grapple with today. I'm a firm believer in the power of storytelling as a means for creating authentic relationships and empathy for one another. And to model what that looks like for you, I'm going to share a little bit about my story and how I got to this role as the Director of Race, Equity, and Cultural Diversity Initiatives here in Barrington 220. First and foremost, I want you to know I did not choose this work. The work chose me. What do I mean by that? In the educational roles that I shared with you earlier, my focus has always been about establishing positive and meaningful relationships with students and staff, and to keep students and their needs first. With each of the roles that I've had, however, at some point I began to feel that I needed to do more to give back. The older I got, and the more professional experiences and interactions that I had, I began to realize that I was really fortunate to have navigated an educational system where at every turn doors were closed, people doubted my intellect or my worth, or had no problem telling me what I should be doing or where I should be going, opposed to asking me what my own hopes and dreams were. When your parents aren't familiar with college or post-secondary opportunities or what it takes to get there, you learn really quickly as a young person of color that you are on your own and need to rely heavily on the adults at school to show you the way. But the question is this: what if those adults and their lived experiences with people who look like you were generally negative and filled with low expectations? Take a moment and reflect back to your high school experiences and your conversations with counselors about your goals. Were you ever told that your aspirations were too high or not achievable? Were you recommended to do just like the other kids who look like you, that were joining the military, or asked to go to community colleges? That's no shade towards community colleges, of course. I'm just sharing this story. I began to realize time and time again that many well-intended educators lack the racial consciousness, awareness, and empathy needed to actively engage and support Black and Brown students. I realized that the educational system was failing kids that looked like me constantly, and I was contributing to that system. I wanted to figure out what I could do to make a difference. So I began to seek positions that I thought would put me in a better position to address the systemic inequities. I didn't realize that that was what I was actually doing until I became a principal. The principalship has been and continues to be one of the most favorite positions I've ever had. I was a leader of a high school that was 1 million square foot in size, 3,400 students strong, with over 260 talented and gifted faculty members. I felt like I was the mayor of my own village. Because of the lessons that I've learned in my career, I understood the importance of establishing relationships and building trust. The students have always been the easiest part for me. I was young enough to be able to vibe with their music and kept up with their trends. And as you may already know, based upon the rise of student voice in schools across the country, I knew that students are ready, willing, and able to grapple with ideologies and world beliefs far better than we ever were. It's the changing of the hearts and mindsets of adults that is the most difficult to accomplish. So I began to have these courageous conversations with students. This is where I really began to better understand my calling. Resources were plentiful in this district, and I was able to successfully work with my leadership team to incorporate educational programs and resources for students that were marginalized. Using data and disaggregating the data by race It was painful to constantly see that Black and Brown students were still having a less than positive experience at school and often did not feel welcome in certain places, like AP and honors classes, particular sports, clubs, and activities. Here I was, thinking that I was the mayor of my own village, thinking I had finally arrived as this person of color, yet students that looked like me were still not achieving. I did some deep soul searching, and that's when I realized I needed to do something, and that's when my journey into racial equity work really began. We began exploring professional development opportunities for administration and staff focused on racial equity. Why did we focus on racial equity? Because we determined that focusing on ourselves as racial beings first would afford us the opportunity to then develop the empathy to grapple with issues of social economic disparities and gender identity. In other words, the first thing that people see is one's race before economic disparities or gender identity. These inequities are incredibly prevalent and need to be addressed as well. But the premise is to focus on those inequalities through the lens of the social construction of race. I was a high school principal for over 10 years, and we had a focus on equity the entire time. There was even a documentary, America to Me, that was featured about our school. However, I knew that in my role, there was only so far that I could go with this work. I reached the pinnacle of this work when I led a district equity team to recommend the district's first racial equity policy that was adopted in 2018. I will also be candid in saying that this work was not easy. There are faces of danger in this adaptive equity work. What I mean by this is that there are unintentional and unintentional barriers that present themselves when doing this work that ultimately try and reset the system back to what it was, keeping the status quo. We can all sum that up with a word we all know very well, pushback. By the end of the 2018-19 school year, I had given so much of myself to the principalship and the equity work, and had gotten to the point where I was just mentally and physically exhausted. Add to that, my son's mother was ill and I needed to be closer to home and just be a dad. I made the decision to walk away from the principalship and work with the superintendent and the district leadership team to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion position to carry on the work. So I left public education. I had no intention of coming back into public education unless it was a job that would allow me to focus just on equity work, which at the time were few and far between. I knew that the only way to truly make systemic change for me was doing so from the district level. Then the George Floyd tragedy happened. I felt empty and felt that it was time for me to get back into this fight. Around the same time, I noticed that DEI positions popping up in a few districts, but was very surprised that a few of them were in districts that were predominantly affluent and white. In my humble opinion, racial equity work in these type of districts is vitally important and critical when considering how students should be prepared for the real world as opposed to the bubble that they may be used to. I ultimately was appointed to the role as the Director of Race, Equity, and Cultural Diversity Initiatives here in Barrington District 220 this past August, and it's been on and popping, as they say, ever since. So now that I'm here, what have I been doing? Normally, as you probably know, when you start at district level positions such as this, the phone would be ringing off the hook, and the expectations to produce something to support the decision to hire you would have taken place already. I have been fortunate to have the cover of an untimely pandemic that has kept people preoccupied until this point. This has allowed me the opportunity to really get out and meet people in ways that I would normally not have the time to do. Getting to know Barrington District 220 and the community stakeholders that make us who we are has been a very rewarding experience thus far, and as a result, I've been able to make some strategic connections for our district equity team that I'll talk about a little later. So as I think about my new role and some of the goals for this first year, first and foremost, my goals for this year are to establish positive and meaningful relationships with students, staff, and the community, to create and sustain a district level equity team composed of key school community stakeholders that will serve as the foundation and driving force for our district equity work. The district equity team will be creating a 3 to 5 year systemic equity plan that addresses systemic inequities and creates more positive and safe learning environments that are equitable and inclusive for all students and staff. I will also be supporting our district administration in identifying professional development opportunities focused on equity for our leaders to complete the school year to help support our efforts district-wise. District equity team purpose. So let's talk about this a little bit and about establishing the urgency of change. It's always good to have a good quote when you present. Here's one from John Cotter from the book Why Transformation Efforts Fail. Good leaders see the need for a major change and will do whatever is necessary to make the status quo seem more dangerous than launching into the unknown. I'm gonna let that sit for a minute. Our professional development learning is going to be a community of practice. Central to achieving educational equity is the development of and strong support for district leaders who serve as a guiding coalition to ensure successful systemic equity transformation. Our district equity team members will participate in significant professional development learning focused on deepening their understanding of race and equity, as well as on developing and then guiding the implementation of the district's systemic equity plan. We will examine district policies, practices, programs, structures, climate, and culture to identify barriers to equity and excellence, and lead systemic change efforts that result in high levels of achievement for all of our students. The district equity team is also responsible for the alignment of the systemic equity transformation plan with existing district strategic priorities and board goals, ensuring that all efforts are streamlined for the optimal student achievement results. As you may know, this work is adaptive in nature. And what I mean by that is that when we look at adaptive versus technical, Ron Heifetz talks about this zone of disequilibrium. This work is going to take time. We as educators, one of the things that's a struggle for us is we love to solve problems. We're all problem solvers. Well, if race was something that was a technical solution, we would have done that already. This really requires us to take our own professional journeys and think about ourselves and how race is played out in our personal lives as well as our professional lives. So we know that it's going to take some time. There's going to be a need for individuals to grapple with their own racial identities and how those identities have shaped who we are and how we operate in the world. Now take a quick moment to think about race and how it has impacted your life. Some may currently feel that race has or has not impacted their lives, or others may feel that they've had to grapple with race. Others grapple with race constantly. If you're wondering, the answer is yes, I am using the term grapple purposefully. As Robin DiAngelo writes, this work is an invitation to grapple with your understanding of the intersection of race and education. In other words, be willing to grapple with difficult and challenging ideas. Grappling means to receive, reflect upon, practice, articulating, and seek deeper clarity and understanding. Grappling is not rejecting out of hand, refusing to engage, debating, or playing devil's advocate. The goal is to move us beyond the mere sharing of uninformed opinions we already hold and go more towards engagement. In other words, we want to have these personal journeys to go beyond diversity to do a couple things. We want to define race and racism and then discover how each, through school policies, programs, and practices, negatively impact low-performing student populations. We want to develop the knowledge and requisite skills for sustaining, engaging, and deepening courageous conversations about the impact of race and racism on student achievement. We also want to construct a plan of action, a plan for deepening our understandings about racism, which includes engaging other members of the school community and dialogue about systemic racism. I've talked a little bit about this district equity team, and I wanted to provide just a kind of just a scale to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. So as you can look here, you can see this is the district equity team, and I just want to kind of let you see the scope and the sequence of the work. Down at the bottom there, I want to draw your attention to the red bullets. These are strategic individuals that are in our community and community representatives that I've gotten along the way that I know are movers and shakers in our community that will certainly be able to support us both as we're doing this work as a system, as a school, but also making sure that we're providing opportunities for our community. Many of these stakeholders, as a matter of fact, are already doing racial equity work and doing courageous conversations as we speak in our communities that is just going to really align really nicely with our district equity team. So I wanted to make sure that I was strategic in making sure that on our district equity team, we included those stakeholders from our school community to support that work. In addition, you can also see the district level meetings, the superintendents. We will have board members on our committee. We're making sure that we know we have just enough to be dangerous, as they say. We want this to be a school level committee and not a committee that's actually formalized. Sometimes when you have more than 2 board members, that requires you to have minutes and do things in a more public fashion that we're not necessarily interested in doing at this time. So we wanted to make sure that we had their input, but limited it to 2. You can see the director of equity, race, and cultural diversity initiatives. At our particular high school, community school district, we have, elementary, middle, and high school. So I wanted to make sure that we had principal representatives from each of those areas. We wanted to make sure that we had students from each of those areas and teachers from those areas as well. We have 12 buildings in my actual current district, and so we wanted to make sure that we had representatives from each one of those places. It's also important to include, your support staff. So as you can see, there's representatives from our building and grounds, our clerical support, teachers aid staffs. We're also being strategic and calculative in inviting and making sure that our Barrett King Education Association is part of this. Our other organizations and entities that have unions and labor unions, we want them to be a part of our work as well. We have a district-run we currently have an SDL committee that's district-wide. We wanted to make sure that we align that work as well, so we've included that. We've included PTO members. Right now, you see that it says 3 student representatives. There's obviously going to be more students that are going to be involved with our work, but again, this is just, an opportunity to what I call touch each area of our organization to make sure we have representatives there. And then in addition to that, as I stated before, we would be including our building reps, or our community representatives. Here are some of the questions that I thought that you should consider as you think about these roles. As I said before, what's been interesting is that as a result of a lot of the civil unrest and some of the issues that have taken place in our country, there have been some of these roles that have been popping up. But frankly, there have been other schools, I'd like to say that Barrington was one of them, that was really looking at their data and really hearing the humble cries of their student populations and staff populations, and made the decisions to go ahead and start looking at positions such as this prior to the George Floyd incident. So that being said, here are some of the issues and some of the things that I want you to think about as you consider if this is a sort of role that would be needed in your district. In no particular order. Do your students feel that your schools are safe and welcoming for all students? And more importantly, have you asked them? Sometimes I believe we make the mistake of answering this question for our students. We go by what the masses say, and just because we see students here that are having a great time, we don't necessarily do our due diligence to find those struggling students or our populations that are underserved and asking them these very questions. When we do ask them these questions, however, we will find, and they will be truthful in telling us about our environments. So again, do your students feel safe? Do they feel welcoming? And that's for all students. Something else to consider. Do you currently have data that suggests that BIPOC student populations are currently being underserved, or as I say, overserved? When we look at underserved populations, we can talk about, we can look at tracking, we can look at students and how they are demographically shared in each one of our particular tracks that you may have. Your advanced placement and honors classes. Do those demographics mirror your total school populations? How about in extracurricular activities or your SEL supports? When I talk about overserved, through my experiences, unfortunately, students of color seem to dominate areas such as discipline. If you look at your discipline data, your suspensions, your out of school suspensions, how many students are getting referred from teachers? If you disaggregate that data by race, does that tell a story to you? If you look at your special education numbers, okay, are those numbers disproportionately high based upon race? You can also look at attendance. Do students see themselves in your curriculum? And in other words, how culturally relevant is your pedagogy? Have you taken the time to really look at your pedagogy and your curriculum to make sure that it's engaging for students? I often talk about my own personally lived experiences of having what I call 2 schools. Well, the second school is when I went home and my parents, had me reading, authors such as James Baldwin, learning about Dr. King, learning about George Washington Carver. They were doing that for me because unfortunately, I was not getting that sort of education in schools. And so they wanted to make sure that I knew the power of African American and Black and Brown voices, then I knew that we too were successful. I just didn't have those opportunities in school. And so I say that to say, are you looking at your curriculum? Are you looking at your pedagogy? Are you finding ways to provide more authors of color? Are you providing more opportunities for students to see themselves in their work, to create more engaging learning environments? Additional questions. Are you or have you experienced instances of racism, religion, bigotry, LGBTQ bullying and or harassment? How have these instances been handled? Who has been impacted? What is your response level? I mean, do you have protocols in place to support situations and support your schools, communities when these things happen? And then more importantly, have you checked in with those individuals? Have you checked in with individuals that may have been impacted and hurt? A lot of times we fail miserably as districts in doing that. And we find, unfortunately, as a result of that, that impacts our students and staff negatively. Hiring practices. Have you considered your hiring practices? Does your faculty and staff mirror your student population? And this isn't just your support staff, obviously. I'm talking about your certified staff. Schools that find themselves that are truly equitable seem to be in situations where their faculty demographics do their very best to mirror what's in their schools. Do you currently have systems in place that unintentionally or intentionally create barriers of access or underrepresented student populations? Again, we talked about a little bit earlier about honors and advanced placement classes. Are there barriers there? Do students feel that staff are challenging them to be a part of those classes? Are we taking risks, or are we just looking at students and their scores and saying, that they wouldn't be able to achieve there? So what are we doing to level the playing field to include students of color in those honors and advanced placement classes, and also in those extracurricular spaces? What are we doing to make sure that in our fine and applied arts, in our plays, in our performances, that again, those plays and performances mirror our student populations? Are we really, really trying and seeking out opportunities for those students to be a part of those learnings and opportunities? Oops, went a little far. I'm going to kind of step out of this right now and put my screen together so that I can see you. I don't know if you can see me. I wanted to go ahead and kind of get through my kind of spiel that I had, and then really allow some significant time for there to be questions that I can answer. So I'm gonna ask my buddy Arlen to help me out here to see if there are any questions or comments in the chat that at this time that I can begin answering. And then we can go back and force that as needed.
All right, thank you so much, Nathaniel. Thank you for sharing all those great stories and strategies with us. We have no questions in the chat. Oh, we did have a couple of people ask if they could get a hold of the PowerPoint.
Absolutely.
Would you be comfortable sending that to them as a PDF?
Yes, I will make that available, absolutely. I know it was fast. I apologize for not allowing people to ask questions during the actual presentation, but this is my first time doing this. I hope to get better at it, so please, thank you for your patience.
No problem. You did a great job. Yeah, we now have some time for some questions. We will leave the questions box open. Make sure people get a chance to type in any of their thoughts, anything they want to ask. I saw somebody raise their hand. Unfortunately, we cannot unmute you, but you can ask your question in the questions box. Here we go. Here's one from Femi. I would love to hear about the types of supports that are available to different groups.
That's a great question. Let me first start by talking about some of the professional development. I'm simply creating a tool list, or for lack of better words, of different professional development opportunities for people to explore race. One of the things that I can think of right away is Pacific Educational's group, Courageous Conversations About Race. If you Google courageousconversations.com, for example, one of the things that they are currently offering because of the pandemic are these kind of 60 to 90 minute really Zoom opportunities where people can go on and really grapple with and learn some tools about how to have conversations about race. I envision providing multiple opportunities for our staff to undertake some of those opportunities. However, we are looking at district level models where we're looking at making sure that we're looking at our entire system as a whole to make efforts in that way as well. So what we're actually landing on is a professional development opportunity that's going to be systemic in nature that we all participate in, such as a Beyond Diversity or an experience that, usually about 6 to 12 hours that each individual can go through that's on our committee that positions them to think differently. And then again, we politely pepper them with other opportunities as they come along and show up so that they can have those professional development opportunities. But there are a variety of those, and I can include some of those at the end of my PowerPoint as suggestions as I share this with the masses moving forward.
All right, that's great. We got some other questions coming in. This one's from Jennifer. She says, how do you get community buy-in? How do you get the community to value the work?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I've noticed in my different experiences in different communities is the data. Really having conversations openly and transparently as a district about data. We do a really, really good job as districts is talking about things and highlighting things that we do well in. There's nothing wrong with us also talking about opportunities for growth. And if we start disaggregating our data by student experiences, whether that's race, whether that's socioeconomic disadvantage, socioeconomics, you will begin to see some trends in that data. And then you can hopefully use those trends to begin to ask yourselves questions such as, okay, well, do we consider ourselves a great school? Are we an equitable school? Because what you may find, unfortunately, is again, when you disaggregate by race, there are stories that our data continues to tell. So being transparent and talking about that data in a very open way and establishing the need and the why as to why you need to address those. It also doesn't help to continue to go to your community and go to folks in the community that are your allies to support the work. That's exactly what I've been able to do during my brief time here at Barrington. Is I went out to community stakeholders who are already, it's been churches, it's been community organizations who seem to have, the library, for example, who have already been doing work in this area. And then I've just been pitching the idea of connecting and aligning ourselves. And then through that work, they put on programs and services in the community that community members go to. And then there's this shared experience and alignment so that then that way we're kind of growing together. And that's the best way that I think and I've found over time for this work to happen. But using data, being transparent and talking openly about it, surveying your community, finding out what our issues are, finding out issues from your student population and sharing that openly. When you ask students, one of the things that I love about students is they're going to be candid and tell you what the issues are. And so you can use that as a tool to establish your whys as to why to do this work.
Wonderful, thank you. From Adrian, do you foresee more school districts opening DEI positions?
Selfishly, they better. And again, these are just the lived experiences that I've had. I was fortunate in my career to be in leadership positions where I was able to think outside the box and come up with programs and initiatives and do things differently. But when we're looking at a system and systemic change, that systemic change needs to start at the top. And you need to allocate just as much human capital into this opportunity as we do with all other curriculum, program, and servicing that we do. So over the years and over time, I certainly hope that other districts will continue to do this work, especially in districts where, again, there may not be as a diverse student population. Those students go somewhere at some point. They go to college. And again, what they're going to do is they're going to repeat the experiences and the lived experiences that they've had in high school. If they haven't been introduced to other diversities, if they haven't been introduced to race, if they haven't been introduced to social justice, they're going to struggle in those capacities. And so we want to make sure that we're preparing our students for the 21st century.
All right, excellent. And a good follow-up here from Lindsay. How do you go about advocating for district level equity leadership positions? And how can we make sure this becomes a more common role?
Well, one of the first things that I did when I got into this position, I sat down in my chair and I said, It was great as a principal. I knew a lot of people that did the work, and I could pick up the phone and call. I didn't have a Rolodex or a network, and so what I frankly did was we created one. And so right now, since August, I'm working with a group of brilliant individuals who do the same work that I'm doing currently. They're all district level administrators. What's interesting is that we've all been in the same role, either if this is our first year or our second year. And there's about 14 or 15 of us that are throughout our state here and throughout our the northwest suburbs here, excuse me. We meet regularly. And one of the things that we do is we share ideas and we support each other in those efforts. And so I think by doing that, I think the word is going to get out. And then again, as districts continue to hopefully, see what's happening in the world and see how important this work is, that there will be more of a need and a desire to have someone that focuses on this work. It just can't be something that's just left by the wayside. It needs to be addressed systemically right away and at the district level. So I hope to see far more of these positions and would advocate for those as much as possible.
All right, so Brenda says, great job, lots of good information, Nathaniel. Do you have programs in mind and professional development you will be doing? And will you also do trainings with students?
Absolutely. I think part of, you heard me talk about a 3 to 5 year systemic plan. And part of that 3 to 5 year systemic plan is kind of that ripple effect, is where you start at the top with our district administration and our district leaders and getting the will, skill, and capacity to support the trainings and support the work, and then allow that to perpetuate in your system. And absolutely, the greatest body and the greatest strength will be the support that you give and support that will be prevalent, that will be needed for this work from your student body. Those are the movers and shakers. This work would not be possible without them. I know for sure that, in coming to Barrington, I've been able to be in contact with a lot of the students and a lot of the folks that were behind the scenes pushing and advocating for this work. And it's because of the students that really we're in a position, and I'm in a position to do this. And so you've got to have and develop systemically a way to support students. And first and foremost, those disenfranchised students need to know that help is on the way, need to know that our districts are serious. And that goes for our staff as well.
All right, thank you for that, Nathaniel. Next question comes in from Amy. She says, I'm in a small district in rural Illinois, and we definitely need an equity task force, but I have no idea where to start.
Okay, I think you start by finding out information, finding out, one of the things that I think I'm sure that you grapple with is when you talk about equity, what equity do you mean? Are you looking at racial equity? Are you looking at gender equity? What is it that you want to explore? And from that, again, you expand upon that and find like-minded individuals and begin with discussions, begin talking about your school, talking about your environments, talking about the things that you do well, and then talking about the things that you want to look at to do differently. And then when you throw a racialized lens over that and you're starting looking at things a little bit more equitably speaking, you begin to see things differently. But it starts with yourself. I can't underestimate the importance of this work beginning with your own personal journey and just describing and thinking about what race has meant to you and how you show up as an individual. We are all racial beings and carry with us that. And exploring and understanding that will help inform how we operate and how people receive us. So again, this is a personal journey, and so it begins in that capacity, and then you're able to see other people's humanity and be able to move together in this work.
Excellent. All right, our next question comes from Sandra. She says, if I would like to, as you did, move from a principal to a DEI position, what kinds of activities should I be doing now?
I think one of the things that was a natural transition, if you will, was systems thinking and leadership in that way. The importance of keeping and establishing those positive and meaningful relationships and finding ways to do equity work in your school systems. What are things that you can do to provide experiences for your students, for your staff, in your school community, and lead to be more equitable? Whether that's book talks, whether that's finding professional development, whether that's finding opportunities to challenge yourselves to look at your curriculum, how you operate in schools differently. Excuse me, I think that's a great way to position yourself, to put yourself in positions to transition into the work. I would not be able to, I do not believe that I would not have the confidence or the will, skill, and capacity to do the current work that I do now without having those systems thinking and the leadership that I learned and developed as my years as a principal, because it was an easy transition. You know, I always tell my district colleagues I know just enough to be dangerous about the district level leadership and moving policy. So that's really been helpful.
Okay, this next question comes from Beth. She says, can you recommend a book to start having the conversations regarding race, particularly for all white staff serving Black and brown students?
There's a couple. One that comes to mind I was just kind of looking at was is entitled Leading for Equity. This is The Pursuit of Excellence in Montgomery County Public Schools by Stacy Childress. What I love about this particular book is it is a systems thinking. It is about a school district that has taken the time to kind of talk about the experiences that they had as they challenged themselves to be a more equitable school system. And so I think it would be something to start with. The other thing that I would do is obviously Courageous Conversations About Race with Glenn Singleton. A lot of the work that really was the foundation work that I have done that has given me a little bit of the strength and the courage to move forward in this work comes from that. You know, so again, if you know, the cool thing right now is that there are so many authors and so many opportunities out there. If you just simply Google racial equity work and opportunities, you can find wonderful resources that you could use. But again, as I look at opening up this PowerPoint to the masses, I'll also include a couple other ones, but those come to mind for me right away.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing it, Daniel. Here's our next question from Sophia. Do you recommend a research-based survey or questionnaire on equity?
Depends on who's doing the research. I say that because when you're doing this equity work, you're trying to think about things differently, right? And so you want to make sure that there is some sort of lens that speaks to equitable questions and equitable responses. And so that the research approach is definitely needed, and I would definitely support that. But I just was making sure that, you know, you want to make sure that when you're asking these questions, we're really, really being specific, and we're really, really being strategic and teasing out information that you want to know relative to race, you know, and how things are happening in your school systems. So yes, I would definitely support that sort of approach. But again, a question that you have to ask about is, are those questions getting at the responses that you're looking for? Okay, so how equitable are your questions?
All right, wonderful. And Jennifer just follows up saying, thank you for your answer and thank you for your service in the military, Nathaniel.
Oh, thank you very, very much. I appreciate that.
The next one from Adrian is not a question. She says, I love the idea of tapping into libraries to learn about the community.
Yeah, I mean, it's the book talks that libraries are able to do, especially right now, are phenomenal. It's really, really another way to go. I'm actually going to tell you, I'm going to pull up my phone really quickly because there's one that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention here. Last week, for example, I mean, this is just an example. If you go into just different libraries, they've been offering these different ones. The one that I'm speaking of in particular was just put on by, I want to say it's a multitude of libraries, and it was an evening with Dr. Ibram Kendi, and it was last week, and it really focused on his text. And one of the beauties of this is that during this time, it's a wonderful opportunity for the libraries to engage with school communities. And if you reach out to them, I'm sure that they're more than willing to be able to connect with you resource-wise, to put on some really, really cool events. And so you're right. And again, that was all the more reason why I was strategic in, as I looked at my equity committee and what we wanted to do as a district, why wouldn't I include our local library as part of that resource? I mean, that's going to be how we tap into our school community. I mean, our parents and everyone else.
Excellent. Here's our next question. What measures are you utilizing to survey the needs of your students? How do you hear their voice?
Well, one of the things that happened before I got here was I have to thank a community organization called Be the Change Barrington. And what they did was they developed their own alumni and student survey specifically. And it was kind of like when I first got here, I was introduced to that group and some staggering statistics. And a couple I'll just give you as an example was that out of the survey of alumni and students, it was about 68 to 72% of them said that race was one of the most significant issues that we needed to grapple with in all of our schools. When it talked about how ready our staff were in dealing or addressing with issues of race, the numbers were less than 30%. So I was able to use, what I mean to say is, I mean, that data was already there for me. But then again, when you're able to ask students about, about race and how it shows up and what happens, and again, students of color, all students, especially now, people are really, really willing to share with you if you're willing to listen, our dirty warts again, and if you're willing to do that and willing to be transparent, you're going to find data and you're going to find out all the more reasons for you to be doing the very work that we're describing now. So you're absolutely right. Asking your students, finding ways to survey students and having conversations with individuals they trust about what's really happening. And again, it's important to do that with all students, right? But let's really, really focus on those student groups and parents that we don't often hear from. Let's find ways to get into their spaces to let them know that this is about them and finding ways to make this school system better for them. So make sure that your focus is on questions and students and staff in those areas and parents and community members in those areas.
Excellent, thank you. Jeffrey's got the next one. He says, I come from an urban area, but I'm now an admin in a very rural area. How would you begin to introduce this in a community like mine? What would be the first step?
I think that having conversations about commonalities. I think having conversations about the world we live in, having conversations about where you're from and your lived experiences in that role, and then things that you see that are similar, and then things that you see as different, right? And then asking the questions why. Opening up the dialogue and opening up spaces for people to begin to have the conversations. I believe once you do that, again, this is adaptive work. This is helping people understand and talk about things that for years has either been taboo or for years have been swept under the rug. So developing safe spaces and avenues in which you're sharing lived experiences that you might want to bring into that community and talk about. And when there are differences, let's talk about those differences. Sometimes those differences are good and sometimes they're not. And when they're not, we can explore those a little bit differently and then find ways to address them. I think those are ways that you can openly begin the process of having these discussions. It takes a lot of sharing and risk taking, but it can happen.
All right, and Katie says, is your network looking for more members? Would love to join the conversation.
Yes, I wanted to. I'm sorry, I'm flipping around with my technological skills here. I wanted to make sure that I added my my email address. If you reach out to me, I promise I'll reach out to you back, and we can talk further on that. But yeah, what my network is doing right now is we've gotten so big so quickly that we want to make sure that again we want to brand this, and so we're looking at focusing on our meeting times, focusing on our purposes, and the like, so that we make sure that when we do bring more individuals in, they understand what our purpose is, and we are better able to connect and utilize our resources. And also shout out to the EDN network, any of those of you that are out there. Thank you for listening and being a part of our team.
Wonderful.
But yes, to expand.
All right, Adrian says, how do you envision attracting a more diverse teaching staff to places that are viewed as predominantly white districts, such as Barrington?
You got to own it. You got to name it. You got to talk about it. You got to tell people who you are and what your experiences are and what you're looking to be. And so sometimes that will require you going to different spaces. We all have been on job searches. We all have been on went to. Gosh, this just seems funny. It's been a while for all of us still, but we've all been to job fairs and places where districts all go, and it's the regular rigmarole. I say that to say, if you're looking for individuals of color, if you're looking for different demographics, you're going to have to go in spaces where those demographics are, and openly brand yourself and let them know these are things that you're interested in. Okay, you're going to have to get really, really creative, because at times, again, stories are out there. We hear them all the time. And individuals of color have networks, and when they're looking for positions, they're asking about, what's happening there. Is this a safe space for me to work? And again, as all of you know about tenure, and all of you know how hard it is to, to shift from one job to the other, it's the sustainability there. What happens when you do hire, people of color? Are they will they stay? Are you putting supports in place for them? Do you know that they need support? Have you even thought about the fact that they might need support because they are their own needs? So as we think about those questions, we need to make sure that we are again, marketing, naming, talking about why we are doing it, and then being authentic and making sure that we're having some supports along the way. And also, the other thing I'll say is compensation matters. Sometimes I've known through all of my career, when we wanted something bad enough as a district, we paid for it. Sometimes when you want teachers bad enough and you want to really, really make things different, you're going to have to do things differently. And that might mean looking at compensation differently.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, question from Daniel. What are your thoughts on how to align district equity plans to the work that needs to be done at the building level?
That's a great question, and the ever-ending question is which one comes first, right? I think when you look at true systemic transformation, it's got to start with your superintendent, right? It's got to start with your board of education. You've really got to get the authorization, if you will, or the commitment to equity from that level, because then that way, as you begin to do that work at the buildings, people are more comfortable. Sometimes people need edicts. Sometimes people need to wait and think that, because again, we're all about trends and we're all about cutting, the next thing in education. Some people have been around long enough to wait out the trends and be like, oh, well, this too shall pass, right? So if you're doing this work systemically, and they see this modeled in your board of education work, if they see equity modeled in the decisions that their district equity district leaders are making, that makes it far easier to transition this work into buildings. What I envision is this: our high school, Barrington High School, already is kind of boots on the ground, rocking this out, already doing equity work. I'm going to continue to do work with them because I don't want to stop that work. Yet at the same time, I recognize the 11 other buildings may be in different places, and our district office may be in a different place. So what we're going to do is start at the systemic level, really focus with our Board of Education, who ironically tonight is focusing on an action item, which is their commitment to equity. All right, and that's going to be a catalyst to really springboard our district equity team, and then hopefully create the seismic ripples that we need to systemically let people know, hey, this is happening. And then again, we will then create building level equity teams as we continue on in our plan. I hope that answers the question.
Very good. All right, thank you, Nathaniel. Sophia says, would you be open for guests to attend the group you're referring to? I'd love to network.
I'll get back to you on that one. That's a good question. And I say that for a couple reasons. One of the things that is really, really important about this work is establishing trust and establishing safe spaces. And so to do that, people need to know and get in there and be trustworthy. So I'm going to, and again, that's the only reason why I'm just saying I'll get back to you with that. Because again, what I would love to hope is that, again, this is going to be a beacon of light and a lighthouse out here in Barrington, and then we could be a model for this work. That's what it's really about. So I would envision us being in a point where we want to share everything and be vulnerable and be open and transparent in a way where people can see us grapple with this work to give them inspiration to do the same.
Okay, we've got just a few questions left and we're almost at 4 o'clock. So this is great, Nathaniel. Thank you for taking this time with our participants here.
Thank you for allowing me to do this.
Absolutely. This is a question from Femi. Since we are unable to ask students about their sexual orientation, how do you determine how to support this group?
I think that there are trusted adults that students have in every building. And, shout out to counselors, social workers, school psychologists, teachers who really, really work hard at establishing those relationships, right? And if you have a strong student support system, okay? And what I mean by strong respectfully is that we don't think it's strong, but our kids know that it's strong. And our kids know that they can come to us when they have issues. I think that is a wonderful way to begin the process of students being able to feel comfortable in sharing those experiences. And again, granted, in the middle of this pandemic, things are incredibly, it's difficult. And so I can think about, for example, our Gay Straight Alliance right now. They meet in the evenings, and for some of our students, it's been difficult for them to be able to even Zoom because they're afraid of what the backlash that may be considered if they're not out at home. So credit to our sponsors who have gotten really creative and have combined this with other school organizations such as anime or other clubs where students can comfortably be in these spaces and then be able to still be able to have the conversations they need, and at the same time not feel that they're outing themselves at home. But again, the key to all of this is trusted adults. And I'm going to ask each and every one of you, do your students have trusted adults? And again, not us thinking that they're trusted adults, right? But our students really knowing and feeling that they can go into these safe spaces and talk about and pour their hearts out, because a lot of times they're not having those spaces, especially in a space where we're all virtual.
Very true. Thank you for that. Okay, last question here comes from Brenda. I saw you included the SEL committee in your planning. How will you also include trauma, ACE scales also in your work? Students are facing so many issues right now.
Yeah, great question. One of the things that is difficult about this work is that because we have not done so well as adults about talking about race, there is a need to specifically isolate race and have conversations about race. And the difficulty with that is that it makes us uncomfortable, right? we just don't like doing that. And what I would offer is that social emotional learning, trauma, gender, issues with issues of social economic and disparities are as equally as important. However, what research will suggest time and time again is that race is the #1 factor in issue. But that being said, to address race, you're going to be addressing the trauma and the issues that come with that. Because at some point, somebody like myself can talk about the fact that he's been stopped by police over 40 times, and I'm 49 years old. Those lived experiences for me are real. Those are things that have happened. And again, there's trauma that comes with that. And so there's no way for me to not talk about my race without talking about the trauma. And so they're all connected. But again, isolating race is really, really the thing to do in this work specifically, because we've just been so horrible at doing it. That doesn't mean that the other spaces cannot be part of this work. I hope that makes sense and answers the question.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Nathaniel, for your generosity with this presentation and answering these questions from our participants. And thank you to all those who attended live with us as well. As I mentioned, this was recorded, and we will be sending out a link to the recording either the end of the day today or early tomorrow. And for those of you from Illinois, we'll also be sending out an evaluation that once completed will issue you the ISB evidence of completion form. So you can get your 1 hour of professional development credit for attending today's presentation. Nathaniel, any last thoughts before we close out for the day?
Just again, thank you for bearing with me. This is the first, I hope, of many of these opportunities. I've made the decision to do as much more of this as I can with the lived experiences that I've had. I'm blessed to have these opportunities, and I feel that, and gotten more comfortable with being able to share them openly and honestly. So I hope this resonates with you. And again, I look forward to you continuing to do this work and what's to come. And please, if you have any other questions, hit me up. I'm around. Thank you so much. And thank you, Arlen, for your help.
My pleasure. Thanks for doing the webinar with us, Nathaniel. You are free to close the GoToWebinar control panel, and that will log you out of the session for today. We hope to see you at one of our next future live events. I can paste a link to upcoming webinars into the chat, and you will be able to register for those. And if you're not able to attend live, that's okay. We'll get you the recording link. So there's a link in the chat to all of our upcoming webinars. Again, thanks everybody. Take care and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you.